Hello friends, Joyful Death here, and today I'm going to read you a story called The Castle by Jacob Davidson. I've spent a lot of time in the dark. I know that a lot of people are afraid of the dark, but I've always found it comforting. It is really no big surprise then that for over a decade I was an unarmed night shift security guard. I worked for a large private shipping company that I would rather not name, and my nightly patrol was walking through several large abandoned buildings that had been turned into storage, and to walk along the perimeter fence of a 50-acre lot. Even though our plant sat on the dividing line of two of the most dangerous cities in the state, I was never really afraid though. Not as if I was some badass or anything. It's just after the initial unease wore off, the place was fairly uneventful. Most of the prostitutes and bums that my partner and I ran into during the shift were more concerned about getting warm, or trying to get a few dollars to buy their next high. We even had nicknames for some of them: Gollum, Meth Mouth, Ms. Fizzle, all of them mostly harmless and more of an annoyance than anything to fear. But fear is a funny thing. You would never know if the night was going to be the one where you came around a corner and scared a thief who had a gun. If this crack addict was going to grab a rock and do his best Flintstone impression. But these thoughts weren't really what scared me. What scared me was the castle. The castle, as we called it, was a 3-story derelict building that had been gutted and left for dead during the economic collapse of the neighborhood that had happened before I was even born. 30 years later, its concrete bulk stood rotting slowly away. Its floors covered in the filth of decades that piled in corners like overflowing rats' nests, which also many happened to actually be. Some of the windows were boarded shut, causing the stuffy rooms to be stuck in eternal shadow, and the odd-smelling puddles oozed under your boots to never dry. The trouble with the castle wasn't the black mold, rats the size of small dogs, or the potential of the rotted floor collapsing beneath you. The real problem was that it was home to something. Now, I know what you're thinking, and trust me, I thought that too. It seemed like everyone that worked at the place had a story about the castle. I saw a face looking at me from the window, or I saw something creep out of there and over the fence. To which I would always laugh and say it was a homeless person. Everyone would always get quiet then and say something like, "You didn't see it. When you do, you'll know it wasn't some bum then." I always thought they just liked teasing me about it. I was the youngest guy on night shift after all. One night, I remember it was cold, so late fall or early winter. I got a call on my radio that someone thought they saw someone going into the castle through the busted first floor window. My partner, Larry, and I responded, and mag lights in hand, we entered the breach. The smell that hit us was terrible, but we agreed it was either a dead rat or something similar. It reeked of the sickly sweet smell of death and rot in the near black room around us. It was then that Larry and I agreed that it was oh so cliched too quiet. We split up to canvass the first floor, Larry taking the right and I the left. Everything seemed to be clear as he and I met at the stairs in the rear of the building. As the younger of the two of us, I volunteered to head up first. As I rounded the first flight, I could have sworn that I had seen a shadow duck into the long hallway off to the right. I yelled back to my partner, "Contact, right!" and then ran after it. I was sure it was just a bum that we would need the police to relocate for us. It had to be. I had thought I heard my partner coming up behind me as I stopped in the middle of the hall, and I turned to look at him. For the rest of my life, I will wish that I hadn't turned around. The light of my flashlight lit up a face that was beyond belief. Thinking of it now, years later, still fills me with dread. it, and I say it here as it's the only word that feels right when speaking of the thing, had eyes that were so sunken they looked like endless holes in its face, and it glared hatefully at me. Yellowed teeth snarled soundlessly at me behind gnarled lips. The sunken cheeks looked like worn leather that had been stretched expertly over a human skull. I couldn't tell if it had hair or not. My mind just seemed to freeze in terror. Everything everyone had warned me about for years, I now understood in an instant. This thing didn't even feel human. That is to say, it radiated an aura of dread, like a cloud around itself. It seemed to make a jerky move in my direction, and it lifted a bone-thin arm toward me when my partner yelled my name from the end of the hall. It seemed to growl at me one last time, and then it appeared to leap into a dark stairwell that led to the 3rd floor. I heard what sounded like footfalls and what seemed a little too like animal claws scramble up the stairs. In terror, I ran to my partner and I yelled at him. I was frantically asking him where he had been. He said he hadn't heard me when I said I was going after the shadow, so he had just kept checking the stairwell. I thanked him for having the world's best timing, then told him that I had outright refused to be in the castle any longer that night. He agreed, and we both hurried downstairs and outside. Standing outside by the truck, I lit a cigarette and looked to the 3rd floor. I could feel the weight of something staring back down at me. That night, I made myself a promise. I swore that as long as I worked there, I would never respond if ever anyone called to report movement by the castle. I worked there for 5 years more, but didn't see the thing again. But I also never set foot inside the castle again either. The castle belonged to it. Whatever it was, I just guarded it.